Imagine standing in the shadow of a 2,000-year-old Greek temple, your fingers tracing the weathered surface of a stone that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Now picture this. Carved into that ancient surface are words you can't read, symbols that make no sense, messages left behind by people just like us, yet their meaning has been completely lost to time. These aren't just random markings, they are deliberate inscriptions, carefully etched into some of the most sacred spaces of the ancient world, and to this day they remain undeciphered, whispering secrets that have stubbornly resisted every attempt at interpretation. For centuries, historians, archaeologists, and linguists have pored over these mysterious texts, and yet the stones have kept their silence, guarding stories and knowledge that could reshape our understanding of ancient Greek civilization, religion, and daily life. What were our ancestors trying to tell us? Were these inscriptions sacred prayers, records of forgotten rituals, or perhaps even warnings meant to echo through the ages? Each unreadable character is like a locked door, and behind it could lie anything from revolutionary historical insights to profound spiritual truths, or something entirely unexpected. Think about the patience and skill it took to carve these messages into stone, ensuring they would endure for millennia, only for their meaning to fade away, leaving behind a tantalizing void. This isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a deeply human mystery, one that connects us directly to the minds and hearts of people who walked the earth over 2,000 years ago. They had hopes, beliefs, and stories they wanted to preserve forever, and somehow, despite their efforts, those messages now exist in a state of permanent suspense, waiting for someone, maybe even one of you watching, to finally break the code. In this video, we're setting out on a journey to explore 25 of the most fascinating unsolved inscriptions found in Hellenic temples across Greece. Together, we'll wander through magnificent ruins like the Parthenon, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, and the Sanctuary of Olympia, not as tourists but as detectives piecing together one of history's most compelling puzzles. You'll get a front-row seat to the theories, the controversies, and the tantalizing clues that have kept experts guessing for generations. By the end, you'll see these ancient sites in a whole new light, not as static relics, but as living, breathing mysteries, each inscription a frozen moment in time, begging to be understood. So come along and let's uncover the secrets hidden in plain sight, etched in stone, waiting for their stories to be told. Our journey into the unknown begins not on the Greek mainland, but on the sun-drenched island of Crete, within the ruins of the great Minoan palace of Phaistos. It was here, in the summer of 1908, that archaeologist Luigi Pernia made a discovery so unique it has baffled experts ever since. Buried in the dark earth of a temple cellarium, he unearthed a small, fired clay disc, roughly the size of a standard modern plate. At first glance, it might have seemed unremarkable, but a closer look revealed its incredible secret. Both of its faces were covered, from the outer edge spiraling tightly into the center, with a series of perfectly stamped symbols, a message pressed into the clay with deliberate, purposeful intent. This was the Phaistos Disc, and from the moment it was lifted from the ground, it declared itself an enigma. What makes this object so utterly captivating and so stubbornly mysterious is its complete isolation. It is a one-of-a-kind artifact, no other object like it, with its specific set of symbols created by pre-formed seals, has ever been found anywhere in the world. The disc contains 241 individual impressions, but these are made from just 45 distinct signs. We see figures that are clearly human, a head crested with a feathered helmet, a man walking, another captive with his arms bound behind his back. There are animals too, a dolphin, a cat's head, a hide that might be from an ox, and then there are objects, a ship, a carpenter's saw, a club, and what appears to be a beehive. These aren't randomly scattered, they are arranged into clear groups separated by incised lines, suggesting 45 to 61 individual words or phrases spiraling inwards. For over a century, the greatest minds in linguistics and archaeology have tried to crack this code, leading to a spectacular range of theories. Some propose it is a sacred text, a hymn to a mother goddess, its spiral form mimicking a labyrinthine path to divine revelation. Others argue it is something far more mundane but equally fascinating, a legal document, perhaps a list of royal holdings or a trade inventory. There's a compelling theory that it could be a narrative, a story of a sea voyage or a military campaign. And then there are the more unconventional ideas that the disc is not a written language at all, but an ancient board game, its path leading players on a spiritual or strategic journey. The method of its creation only deepens the mystery. The use of individual punches implies the existence of a kind of prehistoric printing press, a technology that appears to have been invented and then lost for over 3,000 years. The ultimate frustration of the Phaistos Disc is that it speaks a language we cannot hear and represents a writing system we cannot place. It was created by the Minoan civilization, a people who also used other undeciphered scripts like Linear A, but it shares almost no similarities with any known form of writing from that era or any other. It is a ghost of a system, a single, perfect message sent to us from the past with no key to unlock it. Holding it, you are holding a complete mystery, a locked door to the Bronze Age mind. We can see the words, we can count the letters, but the meaning remains just out of reach, a silent poem whose rhythm we can feel but whose words we cannot understand. While the Phaistos Disc remains a singular, isolated mystery from the Bronze Age, our next stop on this journey pushes the boundaries of writing itself even further back in time, challenging the very foundations of what we know about human communication. Travel with me now to northern Greece, to the serene shores of Lake Castoria, where in 1992, during a routine excavation of a Neolithic lakeside settlement, a discovery was made that would send shockwaves through the world of archaeology. A team led by Professor George Armouziades unearthed something astonishing preserved in the ancient mud, a fractured wooden tablet now known as the Dispilio Tablet. This wasn't a grand stone stele or an ornate clay disc. It was a humble piece of wood which makes its survival over 7 millennia nothing short of a miracle. The anaerobic conditions of the lakebed mud acted as a perfect preservative, safeguarding this fragile organic object from decay, but its true marvel lies on its surface. Scratched across the face of the tablet is a series of linear and angular symbols, a sequence of markings that appear anything but random. They are arranged in a structured, deliberate way, with clear lines separating groups of characters, strongly suggesting they form distinct units of meaning. This simple piece of wood, carbon dated to 5260 BC, predates the earliest known Greek writing, Linear B, by over 4,000 years. The implications of this are staggering. If these markings are indeed a form of writing, the entire timeline for the development of script in Europe would need to be completely rewritten. We are taught that writing first emerged in Mesopotamia around 3400 BC with cuneiform, and later in Egypt with hieroglyphs. The Dispilio Tablet, however, was created nearly 2,000 years before those systems even began. It forces us to confront a revolutionary possibility that a sophisticated Neolithic culture in the Balkans might have independently developed a symbolic system for recording language, a system that was ultimately lost to time. Naturally, such a bold claim is met with intense debate. The central controversy is whether we are looking at proto-writing, a system of symbols with agreed-upon meanings but not a full-fledged language, or merely sophisticated decoration. Skeptics argue the symbols could be a form of ornamental carving, a owner's mark, or a ritualistic design without linguistic content. They point to the fact that no other tablets with a matching script have been found, though the excavation at Dispilio is ongoing. Yet the proponents have compelling evidence. The structured arrangement, the repetition of specific symbols, and the clear separation into what look like words or phrases all point toward a communicative purpose. It doesn't resemble the decorative patterns found on pottery from the same period. It feels different, more purposeful. This wasn't just marking an object, it was marking a thought. It could have been a form of accounting, a religious invocation, or a simple message from one person to another. We may never know for sure, but the very existence of the tablet opens a door to a forgotten world of complexity and intellect that we are only beginning to appreciate. It stands as a silent, profound challenge, a whisper from a time before history was written, asking us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the ancient mind. From the profound silence of the Neolithic era at Dispilio, we now travel over 4,000 years forward in time, to a period when the great Minoan palaces of Crete were ancient history themselves, and the new power of classical Greece was on the rise. Our destination is the town of Dreros, on the same island that gave us the Phaistos Disc, but here we find a mystery of a different kind. Perched on a hilltop are the ruins of a temple dedicated to Apollo Delphinios, and within its sacred walls, archaeologists discovered inscriptions that present us with a haunting historical echo. These are not written in Greek, nor are they in the still undeciphered linear of the Minoans. The language is something else entirely, a linguistic ghost that scholars have named Etiocretan, a term meaning true Cretan or original Cretan. We have only 3 precious examples of this script, and their survival across such a vast span of time is itself a minor miracle. The earliest inscription dates from the 7th century BC, a time when the Homeric epics were being formalized. The latest comes from the 3rd century BC, by which point Alexander the Great had conquered the known world and died. For over 400 years, this language was being written down, a stubborn thread of cultural identity weaving through centuries of tremendous change. The inscriptions are short, frustratingly so. One is on a stone block, another on a clay vessel, and they consist of just a few lines of text. Yet within those brief lines may lie the voice of a people who refused to be completely assimilated. The prevailing theory, and the most compelling one, is that Etiocretan represents the last written remnant of the language spoken by the Minoans. Imagine the scene. For centuries after the fall of their magnificent palatial civilization, the descendants of the Minoans lived on in Crete under waves of new rulers, first the Mycenaean Greeks, then the Dorians. Their world changed utterly, but in isolated pockets like Dreros, they held onto their ancient identity. Writing in Etiocretan may have been a profound act of cultural preservation, a way to assert we are still here in the face of overwhelming Hellenic influence. It was likely used for religious ceremonies within the temple, a sacred tongue to communicate with gods who predated Olympus, connecting them to a homeland that existed only in memory and myth. There are, of course, other interpretations. Some linguists have proposed that Etiocretan is not a direct descendant of the Minoan language, but could be a separate, pre-Greek language spoken by another indigenous group of the Aegean. Others have suggested it might be a highly specialized and archaic dialect used solely by priests, a secret code for sacred rites that was never meant to be widely understood. The tragic truth is that with only 3 short texts, we lack the volume of material needed to perform a proper decipherment. We can recognize that it is a structured language with its own grammar and vocabulary, but without a bilingual text, a Rosetta Stone for Crete, the meaning of its words remains locked away. These inscriptions are like hearing a faint, beautiful song from a great distance. You can recognize the melody as music, but the words are just beyond your comprehension, a lost song from a lost people. Leaving behind the haunting echoes of Etiocretan, we venture deeper into the sacred landscape of Minoan Crete, into a place that feels less like an archaeological site and more like a portal to another world. Our destination is the cave of Arkalochori, a deep, dark cavern that for centuries served as a potent religious sanctuary. It was here, amidst a staggering horde of ceremonial offerings, that a uniquely perplexing artifact was discovered, the Arkalochori axe. This isn't a weapon of war, it's a magnificent object of worship, a double-edged bronze votive axe, expertly crafted and never meant for practical use. Its surface is adorned with a short, stark message, a sequence of 15 symbols that has become one of the most iconic and frustrating puzzles in the entire Aegean world. The axe was found among a veritable treasury of ritual objects, over 100 other ceremonial axes, magnificent golden swords, and double-headed Labres axes, all carefully placed as offerings to a powerful chthonic deity, perhaps a mother goddess who was believed to reside within the earth itself. The sheer volume of treasure suggests this was a place of immense spiritual significance, where the elite of Minoan society came to seek favor from the gods. In this context, the inscribed axe stands out not just for its craftsmanship, but for the clear intention behind its markings. The symbols were not carved, they were masterfully cast into the bronze itself during the axe's creation, making them a permanent and integral part of the object's sacred identity. The script itself is the heart of the mystery. At a glance, the symbols look familiar to anyone who has studied Linear A. You can see clear similarities in signs that resemble trees, human figures, and abstract shapes. Yet, upon closer examination, they are distinctly different. They are more schematic, more angular, and they lack the fluidity of classic linear writing. This has led to a fierce debate. Are we looking at a local variant of that script, a form of shorthand, or something else entirely? Some of the symbols are completely unique and appear nowhere else in the Minoan world, which only adds to the confusion. The symbols are arranged in a single, vertical line, a stark and purposeful column of characters that feels more like a label or a potent incantation than a lengthy narrative. This unique arrangement is the key to the most compelling theories about its purpose. Given its context as a high-value votive offering in a deeply sacred space, many scholars believe the inscription is a dedicatory formula. It could be the name of the deity it was meant to honor, something like "to the Lady of the Labyrinth," or perhaps the name and title of the wealthy donor who commissioned it, a powerful priest or ruler seeking to immortalize their piety. Another, more tantalizing theory proposes that these symbols constitute a magical formula, a powerful spell meant to activate the axe's spiritual power or protect the sanctuary. In a place thick with the aura of ritual, words had power, and casting them in bronze would have been seen as making that power permanent and unbreakable. The ultimate reason the Arkalochori axe remains undeciphered is its devastating brevity. With only 15 symbols, there is simply not enough linguistic material to work with. Deciphering an unknown script requires volume. You need to find repeating patterns, grammatical structures, and contextual clues across multiple texts. Here we have just one short sequence, a single sentence frozen in bronze. It's a name without a story, a prayer without a translation. We can hold the axe and understand its profound spiritual significance. We can marvel at the skill of its creation, but the specific message it was meant to convey across 3.5 millennia is a secret the cave has successfully kept. It serves as a powerful reminder that in the ancient world, some of the most important messages were meant not for humans, but for the gods, and perhaps they were only ever intended to be understood by their divine recipient. Moving from the singular mysteries of Minoan votive offerings, our search for answers now takes us to a windswept island in the northern Aegean, a place shrouded in an aura of divine secrecy that captivated the entire ancient world. This is Samothrace, and rising from its rugged terrain are the sprawling ruins of the sanctuary of the great gods. Unlike the more famous Eleusinian mysteries, the rites performed here were renowned for their unique power to offer protection, particularly for those who traveled by sea. Those who underwent its initiation, a diverse group that included figures like the historian Herodotus and the Macedonian king Philip II, were famously tight-lipped, taking their vows of secrecy to the grave. It is within this context of profound and guarded ritual that we encounter our next set of enigmatic inscriptions, texts that seem designed to be understood by only a select few. Scattered across the sanctuary's stone blocks, altars, and statue bases are inscriptions that immediately stand apart from standard Greek texts of the era. The letter forms themselves are unusual, featuring archaic characters and local variations that would have looked foreign, even slightly alien, to a visitor from Athens or Corinth. This was likely a deliberate choice, a first layer of obfuscation meant to signal that the reader was engaging with something special, something set apart from the mundane world. But the mystery goes far deeper than just quirky handwriting. The language employed in many of these texts is a dense, almost coded form of Greek, packed with unique terminology and enigmatic phrases that scholars refer to as mystic jargon. These peculiar terms appear again and again. Words like theos ekpotamou, which translates to the god from the river, or theos ekdolon, the god from the spoils, and the especially puzzling theos ek sesamon, the god from the sesame. To a modern reader, and likely to an ancient outsider, these phrases sound nonsensical, like fragments of a riddle. But within the closed circle of the initiated, each of these cryptic epithets almost certainly held a deep, specific, and powerful meaning. They were not meant to describe the gods in a literal sense, but to evoke complex theological ideas, moments from a sacred narrative, or perhaps even stages of the initiation ritual itself. Reading these inscriptions is like overhearing a whispered conversation where every common word has a secret, double meaning known only to the members of the group. The prevailing theory is that this was a sophisticated form of protective coding. The initiates of Samothrace, known as Mistai, were part of an exclusive religious club that promised personal salvation and divine favor. The core power of the cult, and therefore its appeal, was rooted in the exclusive possession of secret knowledge. Writing these secrets down on permanent stone monuments within the sanctuary was a necessity. They recorded dedications from the grateful, listed names of priests, and displayed sacred law. However, writing them in plain language would have risked exposing these holy mysteries to any random visitor or invading army. The solution was a brilliant compromise. Inscribe them in a way that is public yet veiled, using a language that is technically Greek but semantically locked, ensuring that only those who had been taught the key during their initiation could truly understand the profound truths hidden within the puzzling words. This creates a fascinating paradox for archaeologists and historians today. We can read the letters aloud, we can translate the individual words into English. We can see a phrase like, "to the great god from the sesame," clearly carved into marble, but without the oral tradition that gave it meaning, without the ritual experience that brought it to life, its true significance remains utterly elusive. We are left with the ghost of a meaning, the outer shell of a profound spiritual truth. These inscriptions are the ultimate insider language, a permanent record of a transient experience, ensuring that the secrets of the great gods of Samothrace, while literally written in stone, have remained perfectly protected for over 2,000 years. But to truly grasp the depth of the mystery at Dodona, we must leave behind the grand questions of state and journey into the intensely personal, into the quiet fears and desperate hopes of ordinary people. For amongst the thousands of recovered tablets, there exists a subset that continues to baffle linguists and historians. These are the tablets that deviate from the standard formula, the ones that refuse to be easily read. Some are inscribed with unusual letter forms, archaic characters, or local variations that look out of place. Others feature odd word order, strange grammatical constructions, or vocabulary that appears nowhere else in the ancient Greek corpus. It's as if the person writing them was either using a strong regional dialect that has since vanished from the record, or, more intriguingly, was intentionally obscuring their meaning. Consider the practical reality of sending a question to Zeus. This was not a private prayer whispered in the dark. It was a physical object that would be handled by the priests of the sanctuary. For a question of an extremely sensitive nature, perhaps pertaining to a secret love affair, a questionable business deal, a plot against a local official, or a hidden illness, the supplicant faced a dilemma. They needed divine guidance, but they could not risk a temple attendant, who was only human after all, reading their secret and potentially spreading gossip that could ruin them. The solution: write your question in code. Some tablets appear to do just this, using abbreviations so severe they become cryptic, or employing symbolic shorthand that would only make sense to the questioner and presumably the all-knowing God. A series of strange marks might stand in for a person's name, or a drawing of a boat might indicate a risky trading voyage the writer was too fearful to describe in plain text. Then there are the linguistic puzzles that suggest not deception but isolation. Greece was not a monolithic culture. It was a collection of fiercely independent city-states and remote mountain villages, each with its own distinct dialect and idioms. A shepherd from the hinterlands of Epirus might spell words or conjugate verbs in a way that would seem foreign and confusing to a scholar from classical Athens. Over centuries, these localized ways of speaking evolved and eventually disappeared, absorbed into the dominant forms of Greek. The cryptic phrasing on some Dodona tablets may simply be frozen samples of these lost dialects, unique linguistic fossils that we lack the reference material to fully translate. We can understand the general thrust of the question, a plea for health, a query about a missing animal, but the specific nuances, the colorful local expressions, the precise emotion behind a uniquely chosen word are lost forever. This is the exquisite frustration and the profound beauty of the Dodona tablets. They offer us an unparalleled window into the human heart across millennia, yet for some, the glass of that window is frosted, obscuring the most intimate details. We can see the shape of the worry, but not the specific cause. We can feel the presence of fear, but not know its exact name. Each cryptic tablet is a conversation we are only halfway hearing, a personal and urgent dialogue with the divine that remains, in its most crucial details, eternally private. They remind us that while the gods may have known all the answers, we are left with the whispers of the questions, a poignant reminder that some ancient secrets were meant to be kept between the individual and the heavens. Shifting our focus from cryptic codes and singular artifacts, we arrive at a site that offers not a whisper, but a chorus of voices from the Minoan world, the royal villa of Agia on Crete. Unlike the isolated Phaistos Disc or the brief message on the Arkalochori axe, this location has yielded over 150 clay tablets inscribed with the linear script. This isn't a solitary puzzle, it's an entire library of them. These small, palm-sized tablets, baked hard and preserved by the very fires that likely destroyed the building around 1450 BC, represent the single largest collection of Minoan administrative records ever discovered. They are the bustling, mundane paperwork of a vast Bronze Age bureaucracy, a detailed snapshot of a complex economy frozen in a moment of catastrophe. The sheer volume of material at Agia is both the greatest source of hope for decipherment and the root of its profound frustration. We can look at these tablets and understand their basic function with a fair degree of confidence. The script is highly structured, featuring logograms, pictures that represent whole words or concepts next to columns of phonetic signs that likely spell out names or places. We see familiar signs for commodities like wine, figs, olives, grain, and livestock. We can count the amounts listed, observe the careful notations, and recognize that we are looking at inventories, records of goods received and distributed, and lists of people and their contributions. We understand the grammar of the ledger, but we are completely deaf to its language. It's like being handed the detailed accounts of a major corporation where every entry is clearly labeled, but every name, every location, and every descriptive term is written in a cipher we cannot break. This central inability to read the phonetic elements has led to a century-long debate over the very nature of the Minoan language. the two main theories are fundamentally opposed, each with dramatic implications for our understanding of ancient Crete. The first posits that linear records an early form of Greek, spoken by the Minoans before the later Mycenaeans adopted and adapted the script into Linear B to write their own Greek language. The second, and currently more widely accepted theory, suggests Linear represents a language that is completely unrelated to Greek, a pre-Indo-European tongue that is a linguistic isolate with no known living relatives. This language may have been spoken by the original inhabitants of the Aegean, a people whose voice was eventually extinguished by the incoming Greek-speaking populations. The process of decipherment is like trying to solve a massive crossword puzzle where you know the clues but none of the answers. Scholars have used the later Linear B syllabary, which was deciphered in the 1950s, as a key. Since the scripts share many of the same signs, they can assign the same sound values to the linear signs. When they do this and try to read the text aloud, the results are intriguing but ultimately inconclusive. The words that emerge do not sound like Greek, nor do they clearly match any other known language family. They appear to have prefixes and suffixes that are unfamiliar, suggesting a unique and complex grammar. Some words seem to resemble later place names on Crete that are believed to be pre-Greek, offering a tantalizing, faint echo of the island's original linguistic landscape. If these tablets could ever be read, they would revolutionize our understanding of Minoan society. Beyond just lists of numbers and goods, they hold the names of people, the titles of officials, the names of deities, and the places they were worshipped. They would tell us what the Minoans called themselves, moving beyond the name given to them by later Greek myth. They could detail the intricacies of their religious offerings, revealing which gods received what gifts and in what quantity. The economic records would illuminate the full scope of their trade networks, potentially naming foreign ports and partners. A single successful decipherment could transform the Minoans from a beautiful but silent archaeological culture into a people with a history, with politics, with poetry, and with names. The tablets from Agia Trioda are a locked archive, and within them lies not just an account of jars of oil, but the very soundtrack to the world's first thalassocracy. Leaving behind the administrative hive of Agia Trioda, our journey now takes us to one of the most remote and breathtaking settings in all of Greece, the mountainous highlands of Arcadia. Here, perched on a lonely ridge overlooking a wild and dramatic landscape, stands the temple of Apollo Epikurios at Bassae. Its very name, Epikurios, means the helper or the succorer, a title given to Apollo for supposedly delivering the local population from a plague. The temple itself is a marvel of isolation and architectural genius, famously containing the earliest known Corinthian column. But it is not just the architecture that whispers of mystery, it is the strange and cryptic messages scrawled upon its sacred stones. Unlike the formal, official inscriptions we might find at Delphi or Olympia, the walls at Bassae are covered in something far more personal and ephemeral, ancient graffiti. This isn't the modern equivalent of "I was here." These are markings of a different order. Scratched into the soft limestone of the temple's interior are a bewildering array of symbols. You'll find simple crosses, swirling spirals that resemble labyrinths, intricate patterns of interlocking circles, and sequences of dots and dashes that look almost algorithmic. Alongside these are abbreviated Greek names, but even these are often surrounded by or incorporated into the larger, more enigmatic designs. This creates a stark contrast. The temple is a masterpiece of precise Doric order, while its skin is etched with a chaotic, personal, and deeply puzzling vernacular of symbols. So what do these markings mean? The remote location provides a vital clue. Bassae was not an easy place to reach in antiquity. Traveling there was a deliberate pilgrimage, an act of devotion requiring significant effort. Many scholars believe that these graffiti are the accumulated remnants of these pilgrimages, left by individuals who came to seek Apollo's aid for a specific, pressing need. healing from an illness, protection for a long journey, or success in a personal endeavor. The symbols, therefore, are not random doodles. The recurring spiral or labyrinthine designs could represent a personal journey or a difficult path the supplicant had to navigate, asking for divine guidance to find their way out. The crosses might not be Christian in this context, but rather apotropaic signs, intended to ward off evil influences and mark the space as holy and protected. Another compelling theory points to the creators of the temple itself, the masons. These complex geometric patterns and repeated marks could be sophisticated masons' marks, used by the highly skilled workmen to denote their contribution, their team, or instructions for assembly. In a project of such scale and precision, these symbols would have been a crucial technical language. However, their placement inside the temple, often in highly visible areas rather than on hidden structural elements, suggests a function that went beyond the purely practical. Perhaps after the temple was completed, these symbols, born from the hands that built the holy space, were believed to retain a latent protective power, and their presence was encouraged as a permanent blessing woven into the very fabric of the building. This blend of the practical and the profoundly spiritual is what makes the Bassi graffiti so fascinating. It represents a layer of ancient religious experience that is often invisible to us, the personal, intimate interaction between an individual and the divine, unmediated by priests or official liturgy. A pilgrim might touch the same spiral a mason had carved centuries before, each investing the symbol with their own meaning, one of architectural pride, the other of desperate hope. These markings are a silent conversation across time, etched not in a formal language but in a visual lexicon of faith and function. They remind us that the ancient world was not just one of grand statues and oracular pronouncements, but also of quiet whispers in stone, personal prayers offered not with words, but with a simple, sharp tool and a symbol whose full meaning is now known only to the God who received it. Our path now leads us across the Aegean Sea, away from the Greek mainland and toward the island of Cyprus, a vibrant cultural crossroads where the influences of the Aegean, Anatolia, and the Near East met and melded. Here, in the ancient city-kingdom of Kition, we find a temple complex that presents a mystery both familiar and entirely distinct. Within its sacred precincts, archaeologists have uncovered a series of clay tablets and clay balls, or sephoi, inscribed with a script that is both tantalizingly recognizable and frustratingly alien, Cypro-Minoan. This script is the crucial, missing link in the story of Aegean writing, a direct descendant of the Minoan lineage that made the journey to Cyprus and evolved in isolation. Yet its messages, deeply entwined with the rituals of this coastal temple, remain just out of our grasp. The connection to the Minoan world is undeniable and profoundly significant. The script is called Cypro-Minoan for a clear reason. Its signs show a direct evolutionary lineage from the linear script of Crete. It's believed that around the 16th or 15th century BC, as the Minoan palatial network was at its zenith, their influence, whether through trade, colonization, or the travel of skilled craftsmen, reached the shores of Cyprus. The idea of writing arrived with them, and the local Cypriot population adopted this revolutionary technology, but they didn't just copy it, they made it their own. Over centuries, the script evolved, simplifying some signs, modifying others, and developing its own unique character to suit a different language and a different culture. It's a powerful example of cultural transmission, a seed from Minoan Crete that took root in Cypriot soil and grew into something new. The context of these inscriptions is what makes them so historically precious. They weren't found in a generic administrative building, but within the very walls of the Temple of Astarte, later associated with the Greek goddess Aphrodite at Kition. This was a major religious center, a place of international trade and spiritual power. The inscriptions themselves are not grand public monuments, they are small, practical objects. The clay balls in particular are fascinating. Imagine a lump of clay pressed around a cord to seal a container. perhaps a jar of precious oil, wine, or incense meant as an offering, and then stamped with a seal and inscribed with a few Cypro-Minoan signs before being baked hard. These sephoi were essentially tamper-proof labels, and their presence in the temple suggests a highly organized system of managing valuable votive goods, a divine economy running on detailed record-keeping. This is where the decipherment challenge becomes acute. We can make educated guesses about the inscription's general purpose. The fact that they are found on ceilings strongly implies they are administrative texts, likely noting the type of commodity, its quantity, its donor, or the deity it was intended for. We might be looking at the temple's inventory records, a log of offerings received and distributed. If we could read them, they would provide an unprecedented window into the economic engine of a Bronze Age religion. What people gave to the gods, what was considered most valuable, and how the temple managed its wealth. But beyond this broad context, the specifics are maddeningly opaque. The language it records is not Greek, nor is it Linear A. It is almost certainly a pre-Greek language native to Cyprus, possibly related to the one still spoken on the island centuries later when a different script, the Cypriot syllabary, was used to write Greek. The ultimate significance of the Kition inscriptions, therefore, stretches far beyond a simple inventory list. They are the physical evidence of a deep cultural and religious dialogue between Cyprus and the Minoan world. They suggest that the transfer of knowledge wasn't just about commerce, it was about belief. The very idea of using writing to manage a temple's sanctified possessions may have been a concept imported from Minoan administrative practices, implying a sharing of not just technology, but of organizational principles for venerating the divine. These small, fired clay labels hold the secrets to understanding how a distant island adapted Aegean ideas to forge its own unique identity, creating a vibrant and sophisticated religious practice that stood at the crossroads of the ancient world, all recorded in a script that continues to protect the intimate details of its daily devotion. Perched high on the Athenian Acropolis, on the very edge of the sacred rock, stands the exquisitely delicate temple of Athena Nike, a monument to victory that is itself a victory of architectural grace. As you walk along the pathway that encircles it, your eye might be drawn not only to its famous friezes depicting gods and battles, but to something far more subtle, almost hidden in plain sight. Etched into the marble of the temple's parapet and the surfaces of its columns are a scattering of strange, shallow carvings. These aren't the grand, declarative inscriptions we see elsewhere. They are small, often isolated symbols, simple crosses, single Greek letters, and abbreviated sequences of characters that seem to defy any obvious explanation. They appear almost casual, as if someone had idly scratched them into the stone, yet their placement on one of the most carefully constructed and symbolically charged buildings in all of ancient Greece suggests something far more intentional. The first and most practical theory points to the hands that built this masterpiece. These enigmatic marks could be sophisticated mason's marks, a specialized language used by the teams of highly skilled workmen who quarried, transported, and fitted each block of marble. In a project of such precision, where every drum of a column had to align perfectly, these symbols could have denoted the origin of the stone, the specific work crew responsible for it, or its intended position in the overall assembly. A simple cross or a particular letter might have been a crucial instruction, ensuring that the intricate puzzle of the temple was assembled without error. This would make them the functional, behind-the-scenes annotations of a massive construction project, a hidden logbook of human labor frozen in stone long after the project was complete and the masons had moved on. However, the temple's name and purpose invite a much more mystical interpretation. This was not just any building, it was the Temple of Athena as the bringer of victory, a sacred space where Athenians came to pray for success in war and to give thanks for triumphs achieved. In this context, every element of its design was charged with symbolic meaning. The strange symbols, particularly the recurring crosses, could be apotropaic, that is, symbols intended to ward off evil and protect the sanctity of the site. The cross, long before its Christian adoption, was a near-universal symbol of protection in the ancient Mediterranean world. By carving these marks into the parapet, the very barrier between the sacred precinct and the outside world, the Athenians might have been creating a permanent, magical shield around their most potent symbol of divine favor, ensuring that the goddess's power to grant victory remained undiminished and uncontaminated by malign forces. Perhaps the most captivating theory connects these cryptic scratches directly to the temple's raison d'etre, victory itself. The inscriptions are heavy with abbreviations of the word Nike, the goddess of victory. We see the Greek letter nu, or a nu and an iota together, seemingly standing in for her entire name. This wasn't merely shorthand for a busy stone carver. In the deeply superstitious and ritual-minded ancient world, names held immense power. To write or speak a name was to invoke the essence of the being itself. By inscribing these potent abbreviations, these condensed packets of divine invocation directly onto the temple's fabric, the Athenians could have been perpetually activating the space, continuously calling upon the spirit of victory to reside there. It would be a form of sympathetic magic, ensuring that the concept of victory was not just celebrated but permanently embedded and magnetically attracted to Athens. Each tiny carving becomes a silent, eternal chant for success, a prayer in stone meant to echo through the ages. These unassuming marks remind us that for the ancient Athenians, architecture was not just about aesthetics. It was an active participant in their dialogue with the divine, a physical mechanism to secure a future as glorious as their past. Our journey now descends from sunlit temples into the quiet, dark intimacy of the grave, to perhaps the most personal and profound mysteries of all. Scattered across the Greek world, from Crete to Italy and beyond, archaeologists have unearthed incredibly thin, fragile leaves of gold, carefully placed on the chests or in the mouths of the deceased. These are the Orphic gold tablets, and they are not monuments to public triumph, but private passports to the afterlife. While many contain lines of verse written in clear Greek, offering instructions to the soul on its journey through the underworld, a subset of these precious foils present a far more perplexing feature: sections of text that are utterly incomprehensible, filled with strings of vowels, strange symbolic sequences, and what can only be described as magical words that seem to defy any known language. These peculiar passages, often set apart from the more straightforward Greek instructions, are known as symbola or synthemata, signs and tokens. They aren't meant to be read as prose. They are incantations, powerful strings of sound meant to be recited by the soul itself at critical junctures in the afterlife. You might see a sequence like aoi ioi ioi ioi, a cascade of vowels that rolls off the tongue with a rhythmic, almost musical quality. Other tablets feature drawings of abstract symbols alongside these words, zigzag lines, concentric circles, or eight-spoked wheels. This combination of text and image creates a potent, multi-layered cryptographic message, a kind of spiritual cheat sheet for navigating the terrors of the underworld. The very fact that they were written on indestructible gold, a metal associated with the immortality of the gods, underscores their supreme importance. The purpose of these cryptic elements is deeply tied to the Orphic and Bacchic mystery religions, secretive cults that promise their initiates a better fate after death. Unlike mainstream Greek religion, which offered a shadowy, bleak existence in Hades for almost everyone, these mysteries held out the hope of blessedness, even divinity. The tablets were meant to ensure this outcome. The mainstream theory posits that these strings of vowels and strange words were mystic passwords. Imagine the soul arriving at a spring guarded by hostile spirits or before the throne of Persephone herself. Reciting these precise, nonsensical syllables was the key that proved the soul's identity as an initiated member of the elect, granting them safe passage and privileges denied to ordinary shades. They were a divine shibboleth, a code word known only to those who had undergone the secret rites. However, a more esoteric interpretation suggests these sequences are something even more powerful, pure magical formulae. In the ancient world, vowels were not merely letters. They were considered the fundamental building blocks of the cosmos, the pure sounds of the planets and the divine breath. A string of vowels like I-E-O was believed to vibrate with primordial power capable of affecting reality itself. By whispering these sequences, the soul wasn't just identifying itself. It was actively wielding power, using sonic keys to unlock divine gates and command the underworld's guardians. The accompanying symbols might then be visual representations of these sonic keys or maps of the psychic landscape the soul had to traverse. The reason these portions remain stubbornly undeciphered is that they were never meant for human comprehension, not even by the initiates who carried them. The meaning was not in a semantic translation, but in the correct, ritualized utterance of the sound itself. The true meaning was experienced during the initiation ceremony, where these words were likely spoken by a priest in a heightened state of ritual ecstasy. The initiate didn't learn a definition. They forged a psychic connection between a specific sound and a specific spiritual outcome. Without that lived, experiential context, we are merely looking at the notation for a song we have never heard. We can see the musical score, but the melody, the harmony, and the transformative power of the performance are lost to us forever. These golden leaves are the ultimate paradox, a very public secret, an open code whose key was not a word, but an experience, ensuring that the final, most important messages from the ancient world were designed to be understood only by the gods and the dead. From the intensely personal and secretive passwords meant only for the dead, we now turn to the most famous and influential secret society of the living ancient world, the Eleusinian Mysteries. Our journey takes us to the small town of Eleusis, just west of Athens, to the sprawling sanctuary of Demeter and Persephone. For nearly 2,000 years, this site was the beating heart of a religious phenomenon that bound the Greek world together, promising initiates a blessed afterlife and freedom from the fear of death. The power of this cult rested entirely on one unbreakable rule: absolute secrecy. So potent was this vow that, despite the cult's immense popularity and the participation of countless famous individuals from Socrates to Cicero, the core truths of what happened inside the Telesterion, the great hall of initiation, died with its last members. The few inscriptions that have survived from the site are not straightforward records. They are ghostly echoes, deliberately crafted to shield the holy secrets from the uninitiated, including us. The inscriptions found at Eleusis are masterclasses in saying a lot while revealing almost nothing. They are public documents carved on stone for all to see, yet their language is a carefully constructed veil. You will find lists of priests, sacred laws governing the conduct of the annual rites, and decrees honoring benefactors. But woven into this mundane administrative fabric are threads of pure mystery. The texts are saturated with a specialized, coded vocabulary known only to the inner circle. They might refer to sacred objects not by their common names, but by cryptic titles like the sacred things or the awe-inspiring sites. A ceremony might be called simply the deed, and the ultimate revelation at the heart of the ritual was known only as the culminating vision. To an outsider, these terms are frustratingly vague. To an initiate who had experienced the rituals, these bland phrases would have been bursting with profound and specific meaning, instantly recalling the sights, sounds, and emotions of their initiation. This deliberate obscurity served a dual purpose, both practical and spiritual. On a practical level, it protected the cult's intellectual property. The immense prestige and drawing power of Eleusis depended entirely on its exclusivity. If its secrets were common knowledge, its allure would vanish. Writing inscriptions in this coded language allowed the Eleusinian authorities to manage their vast international organization and display its importance publicly without ever giving away the game. On a spiritual level, this language created a powerful bond among the initiates, the Mystai. It was a shibboleth, a way of knowing who was part of the inner circle and who was not. Using these terms in a public inscription reinforced the initiate's special status every time they visited, creating a sense of shared identity and privileged access to truth that lasted a lifetime. So what, if anything, can these guarded texts tell us about the rituals themselves? Scholars have become detectives, piecing together tiny clues from these inscriptions and cross-referencing them with rare, sometimes careless hints from ancient writers who were initiates themselves. The inscriptions confirm the strict hierarchy of the priesthood, listing titles like the Hierophant, the revealer of sacred things, and the Dadushos, the torch-bearer, whose roles were central to the nightly pageantry of the rites. They outline the meticulous and costly preparations required for initiation, from the sacrifice of a specific animal to the offering of a special barley cake. Perhaps most intriguingly, some inscriptions allude to the necessity of experiencing things in the correct order, strongly suggesting a multi-stage ritual of progressive revelations, where each step prepared the initiate for the next, more shocking and profound vision. The greatest glimpse, however, may come not from a single word, but from a single symbol found on some Eleusinian inscriptions, a single, perfect ear of grain. In our world, it is a symbol of agriculture. In the context of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, it is her primary attribute, but at Eleusis, it is believed to have been something far more powerful. Several ancient sources hint that at the climax of the ceremony, in the blinding light and echoing sounds of the telesterion, the Hierophant held up a single ear of grain in utter silence. For an initiate, having been prepared through days of fasting, ritual purification, and dramatic reenactments of the myth of Demeter and Persephone, this simple object would have been transfigured. It would no longer represent just food, but the entire cycle of life, death, and rebirth, the promise that just as the seed dies in the earth to be reborn as a new plant, so too would the human soul persist beyond the grave. A public inscription bearing this symbol would have been a silent, potent trigger for that immense emotional and spiritual revelation, a meaning entirely lost on anyone who had not been there to experience it. The stones of Eleusis, therefore, do not contain the secret, they contain the lock, and the key was an experience that we can never replicate, leaving us to admire the intricate mechanism without ever knowing what magnificent treasure it was designed to protect. Leaving behind the secretive whispers of Eleusis, we journey now to the coast of Asia Minor, to a temple so colossal in its ambition that its construction spanned centuries and was ultimately never finished. This is the Temple of Apollo at Didyma, not just a building, but a breathtaking statement of faith and engineering prowess. Unlike the completed, polished monuments we often picture, Didyma offers us something arguably more valuable, a frozen snapshot of ancient construction in progress. And etched into the very bones of this unfinished giant are inscriptions that pull back the curtain on the raw, practical, and intellectual world of the ancient architect and stonemason. Walking through the ruins today, you are surrounded by a forest of enormous, unfluted column drums and massive foundation blocks, all scattered like a titan's abandoned toys. It is here, on these rough, unfinished surfaces, that we find a unique category of inscription utterly different from the formal dedications and religious decrees we've encountered elsewhere. These are not meant for public praise or divine glorification. They are the working notes of the job site, a chaotic and brilliant chalkboard of calculations, instructions, and identifications, preserved by chance in permanent stone. Some of the most common markings are mason's marks, but on a scale and complexity far beyond simple identification. You'll find letters of the Greek alphabet, but also strange symbols, tridents, stars, branch-like patterns, and combinations of lines and circles. These weren't just signatures, they were a sophisticated logistical code. In a project involving thousands of nearly identical limestone and marble blocks, each weighing tons, these symbols were absolutely crucial. They told the work crews which quarry a block came from, which team was responsible for it, and most importantly exactly where it was supposed to go in the intricate three-dimensional puzzle of the temple. A symbol might indicate that a specific block was destined for the third step of the Western Crepidoma, or that it was to be paired with a corresponding block marked with the same symbol on the opposite side of the structure. This was the ancient equivalent of a barcode and an assembly manual fused into one, but the intrigue deepens considerably with the appearance of what can only be described as technical and scientific notations. Alongside the mason's marks, archaeologists have found precise numerical annotations indicating exact lengths and angles. There are carefully incised center points on column drums, used to ensure perfect alignment during lifting and placement. Most tantalizing of all are sequences of symbols and numbers that some scholars argue represent astronomical alignments or complex mathematical calculations related to the temple's proportions. The Temple of Apollo at Didyma was also the seat of a famous oracle, and its design was deeply intertwined with sacred geometry and cosmic harmony. It is entirely plausible that the architects were encoding this sacred knowledge directly onto the stones, providing instructions not just for physical construction, but for aligning the entire edifice with the heavens themselves. A seemingly random series of dots could be a calculation for the angle of the sun's rays on the summer solstice, ensuring it would illuminate the statue of the god in a specific, dramatic way. This unique combination of the brutally practical and the loftily theoretical is what makes the Didyma inscriptions so revolutionary. They completely demolish the modern distinction between the laborer and the intellectual, the engineer and the priest. The same hand that carved a trident to identify a block might also have inscribed a mathematical formula to honor a god. These markings reveal a building process that was a sacred act in itself, a form of worship conducted through precision engineering. They show us that the ancient world's most magnificent achievements were not just the product of vague artistic inspiration, but of painstaking, organized, and brilliantly managed manual labor and intellectual genius working in perfect concert. The temple may never have been finished, but its silent, stone-born paperwork provides a more vivid and honest picture of its creation than any completed structure ever could. Nestled in the bustling heart of ancient Athens, in the agora where philosophers debated and merchants traded, stands the most complete surviving monument from classical Greece, the Temple of Hephaestus. It is a breathtakingly perfect example of Doric architecture, a tribute to the god of the forge, metalworking, and craftsmanship himself, and fittingly, for a temple honoring the divine patron of artisans, its enduring stone skin is marked by the hands of those very craftsmen. Scattered across its limestone steps and marble columns is a fascinating array of cryptic inscriptions and curious symbols that feel like a secret signature from the builders, a hidden layer of meaning on this very public and celebrated monument. Unlike the grand, declarative dedications carved on the architrave for all to see, these markings are something else entirely. They are smaller, often tucked away on the hidden edges of blocks or subtly integrated into the fluting of columns. You'll find isolated Greek letters and alpha here, a theta there, not forming any obvious word. There are sequences of vertical strokes like a tally count. Most intriguing are the unique symbols, small circles with a central dot, simple crosses, and what appear to be tiny, abstract anvils or hammers. At first glance, they might be mistaken for random scratches or the wear of centuries, but their deliberate placement and repetition across the temple tell a different story. These are the ghostly imprints of the construction process itself. The most widely accepted theory is that we are looking at a highly sophisticated system of masons' marks, but one tailored for the most prestigious of projects. Given the temple's dedication to Hephaestus, the workmanship had to be flawless. Each block in this intricate marble puzzle needed to be perfectly shaped and perfectly placed. The letters and tally marks likely served as a logistical code, identifying the specific work team from a particular quarry responsible for that block. A sequence of 4 vertical lines might indicate it was the 4th block delivered by that team. The more abstract symbols could denote the intended zone of the temple, one symbol for the steps, another for the columns, a third for the inner cella walls, ensuring that during the chaotic final assembly, every massive piece of stone found its preordained home with perfect precision. Yet, the unique nature of some symbols invites a more profound spiritual interpretation. This was not just any building site, it was a sacred space dedicated to a powerful and potentially volatile god. Hephaestus was a deity of immense creative power, but also associated with fire and volcanic forces. The ancient Greeks were deeply superstitious, and builders were known to incorporate apotropaic symbols, charms to ward off evil, into their structures, especially during the vulnerable construction phase. The small circles with a central dot, for instance, are reminiscent of simple eye motifs found across the Mediterranean, intended to reflect malicious glances and bad luck. The hammer-like symbols could be direct invocations to Hephaestus himself, a plea for his divine favor over the work and a request for his protection to ensure the project's safe completion. By etching his symbol into the stone, the masons were perhaps consecrating their labor, transforming a simple act of construction into an ongoing act of worship. What makes these markings at the Temple of Hephaestus so special is their persistence. On many ancient structures, such working notations were polished away or plastered over in the final phase of construction, leaving a pristine finished product. The fact that they remain visible here suggests they were always meant to be a permanent, if subtle, feature. Perhaps for the artisans who spent decades of their lives on this project, these marks were a point of immense pride, a permanent signature on their magnum opus that they knew would stand for millennia. In a society that often overlooked the individual laborer in favor of the civic benefactor, these scratches are a powerful assertion of identity. They are a silent, enduring testament to the anonymous men whose skill and dedication literally built the glory of classical Athens, forever etching their presence into the temple of their own patron god. Our path now leads us to the most celebrated sanctuary in the entire ancient Greek world, Olympia. This was not just a religious site, it was the beating heart of Hellenic identity, a neutral ground where warring city-states laid down their arms to compete in honor of Zeus. At the center of it all stood his magnificent temple, home to one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the colossal gold and ivory statue of Zeus enthroned. The air here would have been thick with the smell of burning sacrifices, the roar of the crowd from the nearby stadium, and the glint of countless dedications offered to the king of the gods. Among the most precious of these offerings were inscriptions not carved in stone but cast in gleaming bronze. It is these metal tablets that present us with a uniquely frustrating and poignant mystery, one where time itself has become the agent of obscurity. Unlike stone, which weathers but often preserves the integrity of its carving, bronze has a cruel way of failing. Buried for centuries in the damp soil of the Altis, the sacred grove of Olympia, these once bright plaques fell victim to corrosion. The beautiful, precisely cast letters, which would have shone against the metal like dark gold, have been eaten away. What archaeologists unearth are rarely complete texts. They are fragments, ghosts of documents, where the corrosion has selectively obliterated words, names, and entire lines of text. We are not looking at a forgotten language, but at a known one that has been physically scarred and mutilated by its long interment. The challenge shifts from decipherment to reconstruction, a painstaking forensic exercise in filling in the blanks, where every missing letter is a potential turning point in our understanding. The process of interpreting these texts is a masterclass in archaeological patience. Epigraphers use every tool at their disposal. They study the pattern of the corrosion, the spacing of the remaining letters, and the depth of the surviving strokes to estimate how many characters are missing in a gap. They cross-reference the content with other, more complete inscriptions from Olympia to guess common formulas and phrases. If a plaque mentions a victor in the Stadian footrace and a fragmentary word has the letters ANIO before it breaks off, it is a very strong bet that the missing word is ANION or of Athens, a common way to denote an athlete's hometown. This method allows them to rebuild the skeleton of the text, but the flesh and blood, the specific nuances, the unique turns of phrase, the individual personality of the dedicator are often lost forever. So what magnificent information has been lost in these metallic gaps? The possibilities are enough to keep a historian awake at night. Many of these plaques were undoubtedly victory dedications. A wealthy athlete having won glory in the games would commission a bronze tablet to record his achievement and offer thanks to Zeus for his strength and favor. A complete text might not only give us the name of a previously unknown Olympic champion, but could detail the exact event, the year, his father's name, and his city. It could settle long-standing debates about when certain events were introduced to the games. But the real tragedy lies in the potential losses beyond simple victory announcements. These bronzes could have held the exact terms of sacred treaties, like the legendary truce that protected all travelers to the games, their precise wording now vaporized by decay. They might have recorded oracles delivered by Zeus's priests, providing a direct window into the religious and political counsel sought by states at critical moments in history. Most haunting of all are the personal vows. Imagine a merchant caught in a storm at sea who prays to Zeus for salvation, vowing to dedicate a bronze plaque recounting his ordeal if he survives. Such a tablet would be a priceless first-hand account of ancient seafaring, fear, and gratitude. Today, we might have only the opening words, having been saved from the raging sea. With the thrilling narrative of the storm itself forever erased by a large, green patch of corrosion. These gaps are not just missing words, they are missing stories, lost chapters in the lives of individuals who felt their experiences were significant enough to be cast in bronze for eternity, now silent save for the faintest of echoes. From the sacred athletic fields of Olympia, we now sail to the epicenter of ancient commerce, to an island that thrived not on victories but on venture. Welcome to Delos, a tiny speck of rock in the Aegean that was, for a time, the most important trading port in the entire Mediterranean. According to myth, this was the birthplace of the gods Apollo and Artemis, making it a holy site. But in its historical heyday, piety and profit were inextricably linked. The entire island was a sprawling, chaotic, and incredibly cosmopolitan free port, and its temple complexes were not secluded sanctuaries but bustling, multi-use spaces where the sacred and the commercial constantly intermingled. It is here, on the very altars and walls meant for the gods, that we find some of the most fascinatingly chaotic inscriptions in the Greek world, hurried, hybrid texts that reflect the frantic, international energy of the place, written in a frantic, international shorthand that continues to baffle translators. The inscriptions from the Delos temples are instantly recognizable and utterly unique. They lack the formal, beautiful lettering of a state decree from Athens or the carefully composed poetry of a religious hymn. Instead, they are pragmatic, often crudely scratched into stone or plaster. They are filled with abrupt abbreviations, as if the person carving them was in a tremendous rush to get back to a waiting ship. You'll see a standard Greek word truncated to just its first 3 letters, a name reduced to a single character. But the real mystery begins when this Greek shorthand is mixed with something else entirely. Scattered amidst the familiar alphabet are symbols and signs that are distinctly foreign. Strange monograms that resemble Egyptian hieroglyphs, markings that look like Levantine merchant signs, and sequences that recall Anatolian seals. This isn't a single language struggling to be written. It's a visual cacophony of different linguistic systems colliding on a single stone surface. This hybrid nature is a direct reflection of the island's population. Ancient sources tell us that Delos was home to a permanent and transient community of Egyptians, Romans, Phoenicians, Jews, Arabs, and traders from Italy, all living and working side by side. The temples themselves were often funded by and dedicated to these foreign merchant guilds. An Egyptian merchant company might have maintained a shrine to Serapis within the complex, while a group of Phoenician shippers worshipped Baal next door. The inscriptions they left were not for a broad public audience but for their own community and their gods. They used a kind of professional pidgin, a blend of Greek, the lingua franca of Mediterranean business, and their own native symbols, creating a coded language of devotion and deal-making that was perfectly clear to them but is incredibly opaque to us. So what were these cryptic texts actually for? The prevailing theory is that most are dedicatory, but with a very specific commercial twist. A typical inscription might not just say, "to Apollo," but something more like N.K. of Tyre for safe passage 100 amphorae S. We can decipher parts of it, a name, a place of origin, a reason for the offering safe passage, and a quantity of goods 100 amphorae. But the abbreviations and the foreign symbols leave huge gaps. What was in the amphorae? Wine, olive oil, fish sauce. Who or what does the S stand for? Is it the first letter of the ship's name, a symbol for a particular divine epithet? A notation for a specific type of tax or tithe paid to the temple. The temple on Delos also functioned as a bank and a notary, so these inscriptions could be legally binding records of contracts or loans, sworn before a god as the ultimate witness. The abbreviations protected sensitive financial information from prying eyes, while the foreign symbols acted as a kind of corporate logo, identifying which merchant house or family was responsible for the dedication. This creates a monumental challenge for epigraphers. Deciphering one of these texts is less about translating a language and more about cracking a complex code where the cipher changes from one inscription to the next. A symbol that means first quality olive oil in a text left by a merchant from Alexandria might mean successful auction bid in a text from a dealer from Beirut. Without a comprehensive ledger or a bilingual key, each inscription is a unique puzzle. The frustration is that we understand the context perfectly. This is the paperwork of globalization, but we are missing the specific entries in the ledger. These inscriptions record the heartbeat of the ancient economy, the minute-to-minute transactions that made the world go round, yet we can only hear the rhythm, not the lyrics. They are the ultimate fusion of faith and finance, where a prayer for profit was etched in stone in a language only the god and the merchant could fully understand, ensuring their business remained a private matter between them and the heavens. While the world-famous temple of Apollo at Delphi, with its cryptic oracular pronouncements, often dominates our imagination, a short walk down the sacred way leads to a quieter, yet equally intriguing sanctuary. This is the Temple of Athena Pronaia, a title meaning Athena before the temple, as her complex stood as the gateway, the first site for pilgrims arriving at Delphi. And here, the inscriptions tell a completely different story. Unlike the grand, state-sponsored dedications and the records of the Pythia's prophecies associated with Apollo, the markings at Athena's sanctuary feel more personal, more enigmatic, and in many ways far more mysterious. They suggest a parallel world of devotion operating just outside the spotlight of the main oracle, one that involved a different kind of communication with the divine. The physical character of the inscriptions at the Athena Pronaia temple sets them apart immediately. While the Apollo temple boasts long, formal texts carved in crisp, clear letters by professional stonecutters, many of the markings here are smaller, less formal, and often seem almost hastily scratched into the stone. You won't find lengthy decrees here. Instead, you encounter a fascinating array of isolated symbols, simple crosses, single Greek letters like alpha or theta, and strange, abstract geometric patterns that resist easy classification. Some resemble rudimentary human figures or animals, while others are pure geometry, zigzags, spirals, and interlocking circles. This informal, almost vernacular style of inscription points towards a different class of worshipper and a different intent behind the act of marking the stone. This distinction speaks volumes about the division of spiritual labor at Delphi. Apollo's domain was the grand prophecy, the geopolitical advice sought by kings and city-states that would shape the fate of the ancient world. His rituals were formal, mediated by a priestly elite, and his messages were often complex riddles. Athena's sanctuary, by contrast, appears to have been a place for more personal, immediate concerns. As the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and practical craft, a pilgrim might approach her for guidance on a difficult decision, for skill in an upcoming artistic endeavor, or for protection on a dangerous journey home. The informal nature of the markings suggests they were made by the individuals themselves, a direct, unmediated offering or petition to the goddess, a permanent record of their presence and their plea etched directly into her holy space. The most compelling theories about these cryptic symbols lean into this idea of personal, apotropaic magic, the use of ritual to ward off harm. The recurring crosses and spiral patterns seen across many ancient Mediterranean cultures are widely interpreted as protective symbols. A pilgrim, having completed a long and perilous journey to Delphi, might carve such a sign into the temple's stone as a prayer for safe passage on the return trip, asking Athena to clear the road of bandits and natural disasters. The spiral or labyrinthine designs could represent the difficult path they had just navigated, a thanks for safe arrival, or a hope that the goddess would guide them through the ongoing labyrinth of their life. These weren't meant for public reading, they were a private, symbolic transaction between the mortal and the divine. Another fascinating possibility is that these markings represent a form of non-verbal, symbolic divination that operated alongside the famous spoken prophecies of the Pythia. Some scholars suggest that certain symbols, a series of dots, a specific arrangement of lines, could have been used in a type of sacred lot casting or cleromancy. A pilgrim might inscribe their symbol as part of a prayer and then seek an omen based on how the light fell upon it or how a priest interpreted its form. This would make the sanctuary a place for a quieter, more reflective type of prophecy, one based on signs and symbols rather than ecstatic trance. The markings themselves, therefore, wouldn't be the message, but rather the focal point for seeking a message, a permanent anchor for a fleeting moment of divine contact. They are the silent, stubborn remains of a deeply personal religious experience, a language of faith spoken not in words but in shapes, a whispered conversation with a goddess of wisdom that we can only halfway hear. Leaving behind the personal symbols at Delphi, we now journey to a site that was the very embodiment of grandeur and divine spectacle, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. Celebrated as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, this was not merely a building. It was a colossal statement of faith, wealth, and architectural genius, its roof supported by over 100 towering marble columns. But for all its breathtaking scale above ground, some of its most profound secrets were deliberately hidden from view, buried deep within its very foundations. During excavations of the site, archaeologists made a startling discovery. Stone blocks from the temple's lowest levels, its very underpinnings, were inscribed with cryptic texts that seemed to belong to a world far removed from the public hymns and dedications that would have adorned its sunlit surfaces. These are not the crisp, formal letters of a dedicatory plaque. The inscriptions are often rough, almost hastily carved, and they feature a baffling array of sequences. You'll find strings of Greek letters that don't form recognizable words, jumbles of vowels, and symbolic characters that look more like abstract diagrams than written language. Their placement is the first major clue to their purpose. They weren't meant to be seen by human eyes after the construction was complete. They were etched onto the stones that would be the first laid and the last to be seen, forever sealed beneath the weight of the magnificent structure they supported. This act of concealation itself is a powerful signal that their function was intrinsic to the temple's very existence, its stability and its sanctity. The most widely accepted theory is that these are powerful apotropaic inscriptions or protective magical formulas. In the ancient world, the act of founding a building, especially one of such immense spiritual importance, was fraught with peril. It was believed that the process of construction could disturb chthonic spirits, powerful forces dwelling within the earth itself. To counteract this and to protect the holy site from any form of malign influence, both spiritual and physical, the builders would have performed elaborate foundation rituals. These inscriptions are likely the permanent physical component of those rites. The strings of vowels, like those found on the Orphic tablets, were believed to be vessels of pure divine power. By carving them into the foundational stones, the builders were essentially weaving a permanent shield of protection into the temple's DNA, creating a spiritual firewall that would safeguard the sanctuary for all eternity. Another compelling perspective views these markings not as magic, but as the ultimate expression of sacred engineering. The Temple of Artemis was rebuilt several times, each iteration more magnificent than the last. The builders were working at the absolute limits of architectural knowledge, pushing the boundaries of scale and stability. The inscriptions could encode critical technical information, load-bearing calculations, precise angles for the foundation courses, or instructions for managing the water table that surrounded the marshy site. Writing this information in a coded shorthand would have served two practical purposes. It protected the temple's unique architectural secrets from rival cities or builders, and it ensured that this vital data was permanently recorded in the one part of the structure that would never be altered or repaired, acting as a buried manual for any future, divinely sanctioned reconstruction. This fascinating duality, the blend of the mystical and the supremely practical, is what makes the Ephesus foundation inscriptions so compelling. They represent a moment where science and faith were not opposing forces but intertwined necessities. The same mind that calculated the precise weight distribution of a marble column might also believe that a string of vowels could ward off evil spirits. For the chief architect, ensuring the temple's physical integrity was a holy act, and invoking divine protection was a practical necessity. The buried stones tell a story of a culture that understood that true foundation required both unshakable stone and unassailable spirit, that the most enduring wonder in the world needed to be rooted as much in powerful magic as it was in perfect masonry. These hidden texts were the secret vow that made the visible miracle possible, a silent prayer for permanence whispered into the earth itself. Descending from the grand temples of gods and emperors, we now enter a far more intimate and shadowy realm of ancient belief, the world of personal magic and private desperation. Our next stop is the bustling, cosmopolitan city of Corinth, and specifically the sanctuary of Demeter and Kore located on the lower slopes of the city's towering acropolis. Unlike the grand spaces dedicated to Zeus or Apollo, this was a place of powerful feminine divinity, concerned with the cycles of life, death, and the fertility of the earth. It was here, within the sacred confines of this earthy and profound cult, that archaeologists unearthed a small, unassuming, and deeply chilling object, a thin, tightly rolled sheet of lead, buried centuries ago to carry a secret message into the underworld. This lead scroll is a classic example of what scholars call a defixio or a curse tablet. The practice was common throughout the Greek and Roman world. An individual feeling wronged or desperate to gain an advantage would inscribe a plea or a command onto a thin sheet of malleable lead, often rolling or piercing it with a nail, and then deposit it in a place believed to be a gateway to the chthonic gods, a grave, a well, or, as in this case, a sanctuary of a goddess like Demeter who held sway over the underworld through her daughter Persephone. The lead itself was significant. It was a cold, heavy metal associated with the underworld, the perfect material for a message intended for the ears of darker powers. But the Corinth scroll is far from a simple plea. Its text is a chaotic jumble, a deliberate scrambling of letters and a scattering of strange, arcane symbols that transform it from a simple curse into a profound linguistic puzzle. Why would someone go to the trouble of writing a curse only to make it unreadable? The practice of using obscure language, often called characteres or voces magicae, magical characters and magical words, was a central feature of ancient magical practice. The logic was brilliantly dual-purpose. On one level, the obscurity was meant to confuse and disorient the intended victim of the curse on a spiritual level. The scrambled letters and strange symbols were believed to bind and paralyze the victim's mind, soul, and tongue, making them unable to oppose the magician's will. It was a form of supernatural sabotage, attacking their capacity to think, speak, or act against the cursor. On another, more profound level, this obscurity was a form of flattery and technical precision aimed at the gods themselves. The practitioners of these arts believed that deities, particularly the underworld powers they were invoking, did not communicate in the mundane language of the marketplace. They spoke a more ancient, more potent, and more chaotic tongue. By using this coded, esoteric language, the person casting the curse was demonstrating their specialized knowledge and proving their worthiness to command the attention of these powerful forces. It was a way of saying, I am not an ordinary person making a simple request. I am an initiated adept using the secret names and the true language of power, and you must listen to me. The nonsense words and symbols were not seen as nonsense at all, but as the ultimate technology for interfacing with the divine machinery of the cosmos. The specific symbols found on the Corinth tablet and others like it are a fascinating study in syncretic magic. A single tablet might feature characters that resemble Egyptian hieroglyphs, Greek letters twisted into new forms, astrological signs for Saturn or the moon, and abstract geometric patterns like stars or zigzag lines. This reflects the incredibly mixed cultural environment of a port city like Corinth, where ideas from across the Mediterranean blended into a powerful new system of belief. A magician might invoke the Greek Hermes, the Egyptian Anubis, and the Jewish Yahweh all in the same spell, using a string of words like Iao or Ablanathanalba that were believed to be their true, powerful names. The lead scroll from the Temple of Demeter is a physical snapshot of this globalized underground spirituality, a personal and desperate attempt to harness every available source of power to solve a problem that, in all likelihood, involved love, money, or revenge, the timeless drivers of human conflict. And so, this small, cold piece of lead, once clutched in the hand of an anxious individual whispering a final incantation before burying it, becomes an incredibly personal artifact. We will never know the specific grievance, whether it was aimed at a rival in love, a business competitor, or a legal adversary. The scrambled text ensures that secret remains safe. But in its very chaos, it speaks volumes about the universal human emotions of fear, anger, and the desperate desire for control in an unpredictable world. It is a stark reminder that the ancient world was not all lofty philosophy and grand architecture. It was also a place of intimate struggles where people turned to every tool at their disposal, including the hidden power of deliberately confusing words in the hope of bending the universe itself to their will. Imagine walking into a place that was part hospital, part spa, and part holy shrine, where the air was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and the low murmur of prayers. This was the Asclepieion at Ephesus, the most famous healing center in the ancient world, dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine. People from across Greece would make the pilgrimage here, desperate for a cure that human doctors could not provide. And when they received their miraculous healing, they would often express their gratitude in a very specific way, by commissioning a stone inscription detailing their ordeal and the god's divine intervention. These stelae, covered in stories of incredible medical miracles, are our next great mystery, because woven into these tales of faith are precise medical descriptions and strange symbols that modern scholars simply cannot fully decipher. These inscriptions are a fascinating fusion of the spiritual and the clinical. A typical example might read, "Ambrosia of Athens, blind in one eye, she came as a supplicant to the god. While walking about the sanctuary, she laughed at some of the cures as incredible and impossible. But in her sleep, she saw a vision. The god seemed to stand over her and open her diseased eye with his fingers, and he poured in a drug. When day came, she walked out cured. This is more than a simple thank you note. It's a detailed case history. The text gives us the patient's name, hometown, specific condition, and even notes her initial skepticism, a psychological detail that makes the eventual cure seem even more authentic and powerful. The god is described not as a vague, ethereal force, but as a working physician, using his fingers and a specific drug to perform the healing. This is where the mystery deepens, because the language used to describe the symptoms, the procedures, and the medications is often highly technical, borrowing directly from the vocabulary of contemporary Hippocratic medicine. The profound challenge for modern researchers lies in this very specificity. The inscriptions are filled with precise Greek terms for diseases, bodily fluids, and surgical procedures. We can translate the words, but we often cannot be certain what modern ailment they correspond to. A condition described as a stone in the body could be a kidney stone, a gallstone, or a tumor. A flow of blood could refer to a hemorrhage, a particularly heavy menstrual period, or dysentery. The god is said to apply poultices, perform rudimentary surgeries, and prescribe complex drugs and diets, but the ingredients and methods are described with terminology that has been lost to time. What exactly was in the drug he poured into Ambrosia's eye? The inscription doesn't say, perhaps because it was common knowledge to a contemporary audience, or, more intriguingly, because it was a sacred secret of the temple's priesthood. This blurring of lines between divine miracle and medical practice is the core of the Epidaurine enigma. The sanctuary itself was a state-of-the-art medical facility. It included a large dormitory called the Abaton, where patients would sleep and await a healing dream from the god, guided by priests who likely used suggestion and hypnosis. The complex also had baths, a gymnasium, and a theater, promoting a holistic approach to health that included diet, exercise, and mental well-being. The priests of Asclepius were almost certainly trained physicians themselves, skilled in the medical practices of their day. So, when an inscription credits the god with a surgical procedure, was it describing an actual event that took place while the patient was in a trance-like state? Or was it a metaphorical way of describing a dream that coincided with a real medical intervention performed by the priests? The most enduring mysteries are the symbols. Interspersed with the text are strange, abstract markings, circles with central dots, branching lines that resemble nerves or blood vessels, and caduceus-like symbols. Some scholars argue these are purely religious, representing the presence of the god or his sacred snakes. Others, however, see them as a form of coded medical notation. A particular symbol next to a description of a headache might indicate a specific treatment that was administered, a kind of shorthand for the temple's records. Without a key, these symbols are a locked door. They could represent everything from a diagnosis to a prognosis, or even denote which priest was responsible for which patient, turning the inscriptions into a sophisticated but now incomprehensible filing system for the world's first known medical clinic. Ultimately, the inscriptions of Epidaurus present us with a world where faith and science were not opposing forces, but partners in the quest for healing. They challenge our modern categories, forcing us to consider that a miracle and a successful medical treatment could be two descriptions of the very same event. The true miracle that remains out of reach is the precise meaning behind their technical language and cryptic signs, a loss that keeps us from fully understanding the practical, day-to-day operations of this ancient place of healing. We are left with the stories of astonishing cures, but the medical chart that accompanied them is written in a code we have yet to break, a permanent testament to the complex, intertwined relationship between the hospital and the temple. Standing in the shadow of the Parthenon today, it's almost impossible to comprehend the scale of the project that brought it into being. This iconic symbol of Athenian power and piety is a marvel of optical illusion and breathtaking beauty, but if you look closely at its skin, past the graceful curves of its columns, you'll find something startlingly mundane. Etched into the very marble of its massive blocks are hundreds of seemingly random markings, crude numbers, single Greek letters, and mysterious abbreviated words. These are not the elegant dedications of a proud city. They are the gritty, functional fingerprints of the most complex construction project of the classical age, a hidden language of logistics that turned a mountain of marble into a miracle of architecture. These inscriptions are fascinating precisely because of their rough, workmanlike character. You'll find a Greek letter gamma followed by a vertical stroke, or the word pi alpha rho carved hastily near the edge of a block. There are sequences of numbers that look like tallies and simple geometric shapes. They were never meant to be seen by the public. Once the building was completed, many were intended to be hidden forever behind layers of fine stucco and brilliant paint. Their survival is a gift, a direct line to the thousands of anonymous workers, stonemasons, and engineers who actually built the masterpiece we admire today. This isn't the language of Pericles or Phidias, it's the paperwork of the project foreman. The most widely accepted theory is that these markings are the backbone of a sophisticated logistical system, the ancient equivalent of a barcode and an assembly manual fused into one. The Parthenon was built with incredible speed under the ambitious political program of Pericles, and its construction required the simultaneous work of multiple specialized teams. A letter like alpha or beta likely identified a specific work crew or the quarry from which a block originated. The numbers probably indicated the precise position that block was meant to occupy in the overall sequence of construction. Imagine the challenge: thousands of nearly identical marble blocks, each weighing several tons, arriving at the Acropolis from the quarries at Mount Pentelicus. Without a clear system, the building site would have descended into chaos. These simple markings ensured that the right block was hoisted into the exact right place at the right time, turning a chaotic building site into a model of efficient, coordinated labor. But some of the markings hint at a level of precision that goes far beyond simple organization, touching on the realm of sacred geometry. The Parthenon is famous for its subtle architectural refinements, the gentle curvature of the stylobate, the slight inward lean of the columns, the meticulous thickening of each column at its middle to correct for the optical illusion of concavity. These weren't random artistic choices, they were mathematical achievements of the highest order. Some scholars propose that the numerical markings found on the foundations and column drums are not just tally counts, but the calculations used to achieve these refinements. A number could represent a specific measurement for the unique intosses of a particular column, a calculation of an angle, or a guide for the curvature of a step. These marks suggest that the stones were pre-cut and pre-measured with astonishing accuracy at the quarry, with the formulas for their final, perfect placement encoded directly onto their surface. The building itself was a massive mathematical equation, and these numbers were the variables solved by the anonymous geniuses of Athenian engineering. Another layer of mystery involves the abbreviated words. A common marking is the word pi alpha rho, which is almost certainly a shortening of parastates, meaning the one standing beside. This was likely a technical term for a specific type of block, perhaps one that needed to be placed adjacent to another. Other abbreviations might denote the type of finish required or indicate that a block was a replacement for a damaged piece. This specialized jargon would have functioned as an efficient shorthand for the crews, allowing for quick and clear communication in the noisy, dangerous environment of the construction site. It was a language of action where every second and every letter counted. What these humble markings ultimately reveal is the breathtaking level of organization and advanced project management possessed by the ancient Athenians. The Parthenon was not built by a disorganized rabble, but by a highly structured, multi-tiered workforce of skilled laborers, artisans, engineers, and architects, all operating in perfect synchrony. The temple stands as a testament not only to Athenian artistic genius, but to their formidable talent for logistics and administration. The numbers and letters etched into the marble are the silent partners to the glorious sculptures and elegant proportions, the practical, grounded reality that made the heavenly ideal possible. They remind us that true greatness is often built on a foundation of meticulous, mundane, and utterly brilliant paperwork. Perched on the very edge of Attica, where the land fractures into the violent blue of the Aegean Sea, the Temple of Poseidon at Saunion is a place of raw elemental power. Here, the god of the sea is not a distant myth but a palpable, roaring presence. The marble columns stand as a stark white defiance against the crashing waves and relentless winds, a monument built not just for worship but for survival. It is a sailor's last glimpse of home and a desperate first sight upon return. And carved into the stones of this windswept sanctuary are inscriptions that speak not in the formal language of the state, but in the urgent, salt-crusted vernacular of the sea. These are not the lengthy decrees of Athens. They are the hurried scratches of those who lived and died by the caprice of the waves, a unique and deeply personal archive of maritime hope and fear. The most common markings are the simplest and, in their simplicity, the most profound. You will find countless abbreviated names, often just a single letter or a short sequence, etched hastily into the soft marble at the base of columns or on the steps leading to the altar. These are not the full, formal names of the wealthy dedicating statues. These are the quick, personal tags of ordinary sailors and fishermen. The act was likely a form of sympathetic magic, a way of anchoring one's identity to this stable, sacred rock before venturing out into the unpredictable ocean. By leaving their mark, they were essentially saying, "I was here, remember me, protect me." For many, it may have been a final act of devotion before a voyage from which they never returned, their name a permanent plea frozen in stone. Interspersed with these names is a gallery of strange and evocative symbols that seem to form a visual language of the sea. There are carefully drawn rudders, perfect miniature anchors, and elegant, curved representations of ships' prows. You might find a series of concentric circles that could represent the sun or a star, crucial for navigation, or a sequence of zigzag lines that perfectly capture the choppy, threatening surface of a stormy sea. These aren't casual doodles, they are potent, condensed narratives. A sailor might carve the symbol of a ship next to his abbreviated name as a prayer for the vessel's integrity. An image of a dolphin, a creature seen as a good omen by ancient mariners, could be an offering of thanks for a past rescue or a request for one in the future. This was a language accessible to anyone who knew the sea, regardless of their literacy or origin. A universal code of maritime faith etched directly into the house of their god. The most compelling and controversial theories surround what appear to be complex, coded sequences. Some inscriptions feature strings of numbers or letters that don't correspond to any known name. One prevailing idea is that these are not prayers at all, but practical navigational notes. The Temple of Saunion was a major landmark, its gleaming marble visible from far out at sea. A sequence like Roman 3x Roman 2 might not be a random tally. It could be a bearing, a record of the number of finger widths the temple should appear above the horizon when sailing from a specific point, a primitive but effective form of triangulation shared between captains. Another fascinating possibility is that these sequences are cryptographic dedications. A sailor who had survived a terrible storm might make a vow to Poseidon, promising a portion of his profits if he reached shore safely. The inscription could be a coded record of that vow, a hidden contract between the mariner and the god, with the numbers representing a sum of money or a measure of grain. Its true meaning known only to the two parties involved, protecting the sailors' finances from prying eyes or tax collectors. This blend of the sacred and the brutally practical is what makes the Saunian inscriptions so unique. They represent a world where faith was a necessary tool for survival. A sailor couldn't afford to simply hope Poseidon was benevolent. He had to actively negotiate with him to leave a permanent deposit of his devotion in the god's own bank. The temple's dramatic location forced this intimacy. It was the last place to seek favor and the first place to give thanks. The markings are a physical manifestation of that constant, anxious dialogue. They are not grand theological statements, but the whispered deals, the desperate bargains, and the profound gratitude of people whose lives were measured by the depth of the water beneath their keel. They remind us that for the ancient Greeks, the gods were not abstract concepts, but active partners in the daily, dangerous struggle of existence, their power as real and as immediate as the sea itself. Our journey now takes us across the Saronic Gulf to the rugged island of Aegina, to the serene and sprawling sanctuary of Aphia, a local goddess later syncretized with Athena. Perched on a pine-covered hill, the temple is a masterpiece of early classical architecture, its graceful proportions and surviving pedimental sculptures speaking to the island's immense wealth and cultural sophistication in the 6th and 5th centuries BC. Aegina was a major maritime power, a fierce rival to Athens, and a bustling hub of international trade. It is within this context of wealth, influence, and cross-cultural exchange that we encounter one of our most linguistically puzzling sets of inscriptions. Here, nestled amongst standard Greek dedications, we find texts that start normally enough but then suddenly, bafflingly, switch into something completely unrecognizable, as if the writer's mind had momentarily slipped into another world. These are not long texts, they are typically short dedications carved on votive offerings, statue bases, pottery, or small stone plaques. The opening lines are often perfectly clear, written in the local dialect of Greek, a standard formula like "so and so dedicated this to Aphia." But then, without warning, the text veers off course. The familiar Greek alphabet gives way to a jumble of characters that bear no resemblance to any known writing system from the region. It's not that the letters are fuzzy or worn away. They are clearly and deliberately carved, forming sequences that have a structured, linguistic look to them, yet they defy all attempts at translation. This isn't a case of a foreign language written in its own script, like Phoenician or Lydian. It appears to be a text that begins in one language and then code switches midstream into another, unknown tongue, creating a true bilingual mystery where we only understand one of the two languages presented. Theories about this strange phenomenon are as varied as the trade routes that once connected Aegina to the wider Mediterranean. One compelling idea centers on the island's unique position as a commercial crossroads. Aegina's port would have been filled with merchants from Egypt, Phoenicia, Anatolia, and Italy. It's entirely plausible that a wealthy foreign merchant wishing to gain the favor of the local goddess commissioned a votive offering. The inscription would begin in Greek to ensure the local priests and population understood his pious intent, but then it would switch into his native language, perhaps a dialect of Aramaic or a Phoenician tongue, to offer a more personal, heartfelt prayer to his own gods, whom he might have believed held sway in this powerful new place. The inscription would then be a fascinating artifact of personal religious syncretism, a linguistic fusion reflecting the blended identity of a globalized businessman. However, another school of thought argues that the unknown language isn't foreign at all, but deeply local. Before the rise of the Greek polis, Aegina, like much of Greece, was likely home to pre-Greek populations who spoke their own indigenous languages. These substrate languages were largely erased by the spread of Greek, but they could have survived in isolated pockets in remote villages or within certain ancient families who clung to their heritage. The switch in the inscription could represent a deliberate nod to this deep pre-Greek past, a way of invoking the goddess using her most ancient and therefore most potent and sacred name or epithet in a tongue that predated the current order. Writing this old, powerful word in the contemporary Greek alphabet would have been an attempt to capture its sound, a phonetic approximation of a sacred secret that was never meant to be written down, only whispered in ritual. A more pragmatic but no less intriguing theory suggests these are not bilingual texts at all, but something far more cunning, sophisticated accounting codes. Aegina was famous for its silver currency, the first in Greece, and its Temple of Athena would have been an incredibly wealthy institution, managing vast stores of votive treasure. The initial Greek phrase clearly marks the object as a dedication. The following sequence of strange characters could then be a coded entry denoting the object's value, its donor's account number, or its official entry into the temple's inventory ledger. This code would have been understood only by the temple's inner financial administration, a way of keeping precise records safe from the prying eyes of the countless visitors and pilgrims who passed through. The public saw a devotional act, the priest saw an updated balance sheet, all contained on the same stone. Ultimately, the Temple of Athena presents us with a choice between deeply personal and highly practical explanations. Were these inscriptions the heartfelt, hybrid prayers of a homesick foreigner, the arcane ritual language of a lingering indigenous cult, or the clever bookkeeping of a sophisticated religious corporation? Each theory paints a different picture of Aegina, one as a melting pot of cultures, another as a guardian of forgotten traditions, and a third as a pioneer of economic organization. The stones themselves refuse to give up their secret, leaving us with a handful of texts that are half conversation, half silence. A permanent reminder that even in the most well-documented sanctuaries, the most intimate thoughts and the most practical secrets were often encoded in a language meant for a very specific audience, whether that audience was a goddess, a priest, or a person simply longing for home. Moving inland from the coastal sanctuaries, our journey brings us to the quiet, verdant valley of Nemea, a site famous in myth as the place where the hero Heracles slew the mighty Nemean lion. Here in the 6th century BC, a sanctuary grew around this legend, centered on a temple of Zeus, and just a short distance away, one of the 4 great athletic stadiums that hosted the Pan-Hellenic Games. It is within this powerful dual context of raw physical competition and deep religious reverence that we find our next set of cryptic inscriptions. These are not grand pronouncements on temple walls, but practical, functional texts found on stone blocks and bronze fittings that once connected the sacred temple precinct to the bustling athletic grounds, and they are written in a language that is one part Greek and one part indecipherable athletic jargon. The inscriptions themselves are often frustratingly brief and technical. You might find a text that reads something like, "For Zeus Olympios from the Hellenic of the XXX Games, the Dromos and the Ephesus," and then it will trail off into a series of abbreviations or symbols. The words we can read are clear enough. They mention Zeus in his capacity as patron of the games, the Hellenic who are the official judges and organizers, and key features of the stadium like the Dromos, the running track, and the Ephesus, the unique stone starting line with its sophisticated mechanism to prevent false starts. But it's the parts we can't read that hold the intrigue. The abbreviations are severe, reducing what were likely important titles or specific events to a single letter or a combination of 2. Even more puzzling are the occasional symbols that accompany them. A simple drawing of a jumping weight, a discus, or a strigil, the curved tool athletes use to scrape oil and dust from their skin. The prevailing theory is that we are looking at the highly specialized language of the games administration, a form of bureaucratic shorthand that was perfectly clear to the officials of the time but is now lost to us. The Nemean Games were a massive logistical undertaking, requiring the management of athletes, horses, events, and sacred ceremonies. These inscriptions likely served as dedicatory markers for new construction or repairs, funded by the profits from a successful iteration of the games or by a wealthy benefactor. The abbreviations probably denoted specific committees, the particular edition of the games being commemorated, or the exact event whose proceeds funded the project. A single letter might distinguish between the revenues from the boys' wrestling competition and the men's, or between a chariot race and the foot race. This wasn't meant to be obscure, it was meant to be efficient, a precise technical record for those in the know. This efficiency, however, points to a deeper, more profound intersection of the spiritual and the athletic. The games at Nemea were not a secular sporting event. They were fundamentally a religious festival held in honor of Zeus. Every sprint, every discus throw, every wrestling match was an act of devotion, a way to physically glorify the god through the peak achievement of the human body. The athletes were not just competitors, they were religious participants. The inscriptions bridge these two worlds. By recording an athletic achievement, the funding of a new starting gate from the proceeds of a race in a dedication to Zeus, they make the victory itself an offering. The obscure abbreviations become a kind of sacred language, a way of talking about the mundane details of the games in a context that elevates them to a divine offering. The language is technical because the act of organizing the games was itself a form of worship, requiring precision and care to please the god. The greatest frustration and the core of the mystery lies in the fact that this specialized vocabulary was almost certainly passed down orally. A young official would learn from his elders that the symbol of a jumping weight next to the letters Pia meant funds from the pentathlon allocated for the altar. There was no need to write out the full phrase every time. This oral tradition means we lack a manual, a key to the code. We can guess that a particular abbreviation relates to a foot race, but we cannot know if it specifies a race for boys, men, or a specific distance. We can see a symbol for a discus, but we cannot tell if it marks a record throw or commemorates a specific champion. These inscriptions are the bare bones of a rich, living administrative system whose flesh and blood have vanished. They are the part of the iceberg visible above the water, hinting at a vast and complex world of ritual and regulation beneath the surface, a world where the sweat of an athlete and the will of a god were considered two sides of the same sacred coin. Yet for all the public glory bestowed upon the victors, a quieter, more mysterious power operated within the sanctuary, one centered around a figure whose authority was both revered and veiled in secrecy, the priestess of Hera. Our final journey takes us to the great temple of Hera at Olympia, one of the oldest and most venerable structures at the site. Here, amidst the athletic frenzy dedicated to her husband Zeus, the queen of the gods held her own court, administered by a succession of women who left behind a legacy not of statues but of words, inscriptions that are at once revealing and deeply, intentionally cryptic. These texts, carved on statue bases and dedicatory plaques, are our most direct link to the powerful women who managed one of the most important religious cults in Greece, and they are written in a language that feels both official and oddly secretive. The inscriptions themselves are public records, meant to commemorate the tenure and pious acts of these high priestesses. They name the women, often noting their fathers and sometimes even their home cities, a level of detail that marks their significant social status. They record their generous dedications to the goddess, a new statue, a repaired altar, a set of costly ceremonial vessels. But woven into these standard formulas are sudden, jarring departures into the obscure. The text will be flowing in clear Greek and then, without warning, introduce a strange, specialized term, a word that appears nowhere else in the entire corpus of ancient Greek literature. You might see a phrase like, "She performed the thrice heroic rite for the goddess," or "She dedicated this after the successful Knight of the Shield." These are not typos or damaged letters. They are deliberate uses of a specialized, coded vocabulary that was clearly understood within the inner circle of Hera's cult, but would have been completely baffling to an outsider, even an educated Greek man from Athens. This deliberate obscurity speaks directly to the unique nature of women's religious roles in ancient Greece. While public life and state religion were overwhelmingly dominated by men, the worship of goddesses like Hera, Demeter, and Artemis often provided a rare sphere of significant female authority and autonomy. The priestess of Hera at Olympia was not a minor functionary. She was a woman of immense influence, overseeing a vast budget, managing the temple's lands and holdings, and presiding over ceremonies that were closed to men entirely. The use of this coded language or sacred jargon was likely a way to protect the sanctity and exclusivity of these female-led rites. By writing about them in public inscriptions using terms that only the initiated would understand, the priestesses could publicly celebrate their piety and their successful administration of the cult without ever divulging the actual secrets of the rituals themselves. It was a brilliant compromise between the need for public recognition and the uncompromising demand for religious secrecy. The most compelling theories about these terms suggest they are veiled references to specific, women-only ceremonies that were central to the worship of Hera. A phrase like the Night of the Shield could point to a nocturnal ceremony involving a sacred object, perhaps a ritual reenactment of the goddess's own myths. Hera was annually rejuvenated in a secret spring, restoring her virginity, a powerful concept of cyclical renewal that would have been profoundly meaningful to her female devotees. A thrice heroic rite might involve invocations to legendary heroines or a three-part ritual process of purification, invocation, and communion. These ceremonies would have been the highlight of a woman's religious life at Olympia, events of intense emotion and spiritual significance that bonded the community of women together, separate from the aggressive competition of the male-dominated games. The inscriptions, therefore, are not just dry records, they are proud, public acknowledgments that these powerful events occurred, their very obscurity acting as a shield for the profound and personal experiences they contained. Ultimately, the inscriptions from the Temple of Hera present a fascinating paradox. They are incredibly revealing, giving us the names and deeds of historically invisible women, allowing them to step out of the shadows of history and assert their legacy in stone. Yet, in the same breath, they fiercely protect the inner world of their worship. We can know who they were, but we cannot truly know what they did. We can see that they performed a rite called the Night of the Shield, but we will likely never know what that beautiful, mysterious phrase actually entailed. The stones grant these women a voice, but they also ensure that their most sacred whispers remain forever between them and their goddess, a final, enduring testament to the power of a secret faithfully kept. And so our journey ends not with a final answer, but with a panorama of profound questions. From the singular enigma of the Phaistos Disc to the whispered contracts on the lead curse tablets of Corinth, we have wandered through a landscape of eternal silence. We have stood before administrative lists we cannot read in Linear A, decoded the logistical poetry of Mason's marks on the Parthenon, and tried to grasp the mystical vowel chants meant only for the ears of the gods and the dead. This incredible diversity is the entire point. There was no single way to communicate with the divine or to record human endeavor in the ancient Greek world. These mysteries are not a failure of archaeology. They are a testament to the breathtaking complexity of a civilization that wove together the practical and the spiritual, the public and the deeply private, into a rich and multifaceted tapestry. What these silent stones ultimately reveal is a society far more nuanced than the marble statues and perfect temples might suggest. It was a world where a master architect could inscribe a complex mathematical formula next to a protective prayer on a foundation block, seeing no contradiction between divine blessing and engineering genius. It was a culture where a wealthy merchant on Delos could mix Greek abbreviations with Phoenician symbols in a dedication, his personal identity as fluid as the sea he sailed. It was a place where the most powerful women in Greece, the priestesses of Hera, could proudly carve their names and achievements into stone for all to see, while using a coded sacred jargon to protect the intimate secrets of their most holy rites. These inscriptions show us that ancient Greek religion was not a monolithic, organized doctrine, but a living, evolving, and intensely personal dialogue between humanity and the heavens, conducted in 1,000 different dialects, both spoken and unspoken. The true gift of these 25 puzzles is that they are not closed doors but open invitations. They remind us that history is not a book with all the answers in the back. It is an ongoing conversation, a grand detective story where each new generation brings its own perspective and tools to the table. Perhaps you looked at the spiral on the Phaistos Disc and thought of a board game, or heard the strings of vowels from the gold tablets and considered their power as sonic frequencies. Maybe you have a theory about what was in those 100 amphorae dedicated on Delos, or what a specific mason's mark on the temple of Hephaestus was truly meant to signify. The conversation doesn't end here, it continues with you. Share your own ideas and theories in the comments below. What mystery captivated you the most, and what do you believe its secret could be? If unraveling the secrets of the past excites you, if you're eager to join the hunt for answers to history's greatest enigmas, then you're in the right place. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next adventure into the shadows of history, where we'll continue to explore the lost languages, buried cities, and unsolved mysteries that connect us to the fascinating, elusive minds of our ancestors. The stones have kept their secrets for millennia, but the conversation is just getting started.